Hello, Dan. Welcome to this conversation about your exciting work there at the Academy around piloting unseen observation. Thank you for making a bit of time to share with us some of your insights about that. Just to do the introductions first. So my name's Joanne Miles and I'm a consultant, a trainer and a coach in the education sector. I work in schools, I work in colleges, in FE and a little bit in universities as well sometimes. And Dan, say a bit about what you do there in Glasgow.
Yeah, so I work at Glasgow Academy, where I'm a geography teacher by trade, but also have a responsibility to help introduce and integrate coaching into the school, which has been really exciting amongst various other pretty mundane things I do in between. But yeah, that's me.
Super. So it's a range of hats like most people have in their job, I think, these days.
Range of exactly.
So we started a little bit of work earlier in the year around unseen observation as a developmental cycle. So I've shared on the screen for people who are listening and watching the observation cycle developed by Professor Matt O'Leary, written about extensively prior to 2020, but more recently in articles and in discussion work in Zoom sessions with Matt around this cycle. So I asked you to come today really to talk about this as a CPD cycle, as a reflective cycle for teachers. So first of all, I just wanted us to draw out thoughts about our feelings around what appeals to us in this cycle for teachers. So for people watching, this cycle is a really interesting way of approaching a lesson preparation. It's about thinking around your practice really deeply and talking to a colleague about that before you actually deliver the lesson. Delivering the lesson then and doing some really deep reflective thinking afterwards, gathering some feedback from the learners, and then having the chance to reflect again on your own and with a colleague. It's a really in-depth cycle for me, focusing on an aspect of practice and having the responsibility of bouncing your ideas off a colleague to really deepen that thinking. So that's why it appeals to me. So for you, Dan, what appeals to you about this cycle?
Um, there's two aspects, I think. One with my coaching hat on, I think what I like about it, I've always been looking for ways to integrate coaching into teaching and learning. So I like the fact that the model enables that to happen. I think that's really important. And as you say, it enables that sort of deep reflection to take place. But on a more practical basis, I like the simplicity of the model. It's very easy to follow. But more importantly, I think it gives teachers a real sense of agency that they can get to grips with something which is probably the most important thing, which is teaching lessons. And that's unfortunately in education today, although there's a large emphasis on that, it seems the time teachers have to do that is less and less. So I think this is really useful in that sense. Yeah.
It really is great for creating a space and making people pause and stop, I think, and really interrogating their own minds why they're making choices in that lesson, the thoughts about how they might be grouping the learners, the thoughts about the materials and resources and tasks that they're selecting, and
Mhm.
maybe just pausing to think about that in more detail and depth than they would have done in the rush of the usual routine. And I think your point about this linking through to coaching is really powerful. In stage 3, the teacher is meeting with the coach. This could be a teaching learning coach, an advanced practitioner. It could be a peer that they trust and feel comfortable with. They're meeting to discuss the lesson plan and the resources before they actually teach that lesson to the learners. And in my experience, that pre-meet is really invaluable in developing thinking, in extending the options of what might happen in that lesson, and just allowing the teacher to go into it much better thought out and prepared through that reflective conversation they've had with a colleague. So I think there's great appeal in the pre-stage. Like you said, I think it's really helpful as a vehicle. It gives us a set of steps to follow in a process, if you like, to actually go through, to come through to deeper reflection and to come out the end with maybe some changes and some learning to take forward. Anything else that struck you before we move on, Dan, about the appeal of this?
Yeah, no, I just think it's the most important thing we do is teach the pupils, and I just feel over the years that's got very lost. But certainly, you're right. The space it gives teachers to think about the planning stages of their lessons is crucial, because if we're brutally honest, most teachers probably do that on the way home in the car as they're driving or something
Yeah,
like that, and
yeah.
that's not. ideal. So what I like about this is that opportunity to discuss it with a colleague, and then and take it from there. And I really like the opportunity it gives you to engage in professional learning and professional reading to improve a practitioner as well. I think that's fantastic.
Exactly. And as you rightly said, there's so little time for all of these things. So almost it's a vehicle and an opportunity that this can create for that activity to happen, which may not have occurred without the shape, if you like, that this provides. So I think lots of benefits for people to consider if you haven't already explored this model in your setting.
Yeah, absolutely. I think by signing up to the process, you in a sense create that space, which then can go from there. So yeah, I think if you're committed and determined, yeah, it's a wonderful thing. Yeah.
Excellent. So let's hear a little bit from you about the developmental context in the academy before you started. So were you already doing peer observation? Was coaching in place? Well, just give us an overview of the context there before you tried on unseen observation.
Yeah, sure. So we've got a very active teaching and learning focus group at the school who for a number of years have been trying to help teachers learn more and improve their practice. And part of that has been observation cycles in different guises, amongst other things. And that's been going on. So staff are used to doing that in some capacity. I've been working with senior leaders in the school for probably 4 or 5 years about trying to gradually create and integrate a coaching culture into what we do. We're not there yet, but we have over the years implemented coaching into our professional development and review cycle and sort of moved away from that old appraisal model. So it's much more about what people want to do and thinking about how they're going to do it within the context of the school and the school development plans. That's really healthy. So there was already a lot in place, which was really beneficial. But a part of the new PRD system, which was really exciting and really useful in this setting, was that one of the things we set up was every member of staff would, in their PRD, take part in some sort of active engagement activity. So that could be doing some professional reading and disseminating that through staff. It could be going on some course that they've chosen to be a part of and then again sharing that. Or it could be doing a practitioner inquiry or something like that. So with that PRD system set up, I thought this was then a perfect opportunity to try and integrate this as an option for people to take part in as well. So that's how it kind of all fitted together, really. But what was really nice, and to some extent it just naturally occurred, is that as we moved away from the appraisal system, as coaching developed more, this seems to just come along at the right time, and here we are.
And when you say PRD, is that performance review? What does that stand for there? Because there's so many acronyms in different
Professional
institutions.
development review.
Professional development review. Okay, yeah, that's common in lots of the FE colleges where I work as well.
Oh, okay.
And I like that idea that this is linked to that ownership of teachers of choice about aspects that they're going to focus on and explore and explore those over time and have that reflective space. So this is actually a fantastic fit into a model such as that, isn't it? Because it creates the ownership opportunity, but gives you a vehicle through which to enact it, if you like.
Yeah, absolutely. And the PRD model we've got, it utilizes coaching within that, and you would meet with your coach each year to discuss what it is you want to look at and how you're going to do that and review it at the end of the year. So people are au fait with the nature of those kind of conversations already, which is nice. So if they sign up for something like this, they then would already have a kind of feeling of what they're going to get, really. So that's quite nice. Yeah.
So any other things that drew you particularly to this model as opposed to introducing a different way of offering development? What particularly attracted you to this model?
I think there's a number of things really, and I've kind of touched on them already. Is I think one of the great things that's happened in education over time is that we've got more access to professional learning than ever before, and I think that's certainly made a difference to the way I teach and way I do my work and stuff, and that's wonderful. So I think the fact that we've got something solid that enables us to engage in that is really good. What I really liked about this was the structure it gives people. So, we've all been in education and seen lots of white elephants come and go, but the structure of this means that we can follow it. And if we follow it from A to B, we'll get there, and it will take us through the process. And it's really controlled in that sense. And I like that too. It gives some people security about what you're doing. Again, as a kind of complete coaching advocate, I really like the fact that we can use coaching to think about our learning and our teaching. I think that's great, and often, as you all know, you often have your best insights when you've had the coaching conversation and not all the time, but that reflection afterwards is really valuable, and that's something I've found that I really enjoyed from it, but also the people who took part this time. So lots and lots of positives, really. But I suppose you were the one who got me onto this originally, in the sense that I remember seeing you give a talk at the Growth Coaching International conference a couple of years ago. I remember doing your talk on this, and it was great to see you talk about that. And at the time, I was looking for ways, as I say, to integrate coaching into teaching and learning, and this seemed like a real possibility.
It's really interesting, the notion of the power of it being a cycle and having these steps and stages to carry us through that process, I think. And the fact that underneath this cycle, you've got plan, you've got do, you've got reflect, you've got kind of three of the pillars that we know really help people to learn. So for me, there's a solidity and a solid principle there that makes this such a great cycle to bring into your professional learning opportunities in a college, in a school, in a university, wherever you might be. Great. Okay, so you, in the end, we did a little bit of work together, planning and devising a pilot structure, as opposed to rolling it across the whole academy immediately. You opted to go for a smaller scale pilot. So just talk us through the purpose, the aim, the rationale in structuring it as a pilot, as opposed to a full organizational rollout.
I think the danger of going down, putting it out to everybody at once, is that it can feel like a bit like a top-down approach. And I didn't want that to be the case. I'm also, with the best will in the world as well, some things that you may try in schools may just not work, and it's important that it works within your context, really. So I think the benefit of piloting it was to see what was possible, and fortunately, over the years, as I say, I've spoken at various points about coaching within the school and done some work on that. We've got growth coaching to come in and do some training, and I've done some work with staff too. So that's all quite familiar. But I think what the pilot enabled us to do, like all good pilots should really, was to identify what works and identify any pitfalls, really. And that's now in the second year. This second cycle has meant that we can tweak things a bit, and then recruit some more people who want to have a go, which is great. And every year we do it, hopefully we'll get a bit better, and hopefully people will feel they're getting more and more out of it. I've certainly learned a lot, as I'll reiterate later on. So really positive so far. And I suppose big question for me, that I posed to staff at the beginning really is, what do you want to change about the way you do things in your classroom? And from there, we can really take things on and really have a think about what it is we wanted to get better at, which is nice.
Great. And that's all coming back to the ownership and the choice and the autonomy, isn't it? Which is, I just think, fundamental to getting professional learning to really take hold with people and have legs, if you like. So just give us a sense in the pilot of how big is the academy in terms of staff numbers, and how many people were involved in this initial pilot phase, so we can get a sense of scope at this point.
Yeah, so the academy is an all-through school, so it's a 3 to 18 school. This pilot was aimed at senior school teachers, so you secondary teachers effectively. And when I set it up, I had some help from the teaching and learning group and the wonderful Erin Cullen Darcy. So thank you, Erin. And she and I decided to target and to approach staff in the teaching and learning group, as they were already happy to sort of do observations and attempt these sort of things. And that's where we drew our first batch of staff from, effectively. And they were very keen to get involved. So we started with a pilot of just 6 people, actually, which is quite small. I wanted to do it as well. as I wanted to see it from both sides in terms of how I can manage it, but also what it's like to be on the other side of things.
Yeah.
And that was important. So yeah, it was quite small at first, but I think that was better because it enabled us to have better conversations about what was working, what wasn't working, and when we were meeting to discuss the process at various points and the different stages. Because you had quite a small group, you could have quite an honest discussion, and also build up some real rapport with people, and that was lovely. Yeah.
I think smaller pilots, they're more manageable logistically. They're often more intimate. They're easier to get deeper learning conversations out of in a smaller group. So even though they're small in numbers, I think often you can get really good safe space learning to happen in them. And then there's different challenges actually when you scale up to it being
Yeah.
a whole organization approach. But from that small scale, I think you can learn quite a few lessons quite cheaply and pick up some great learning points to take forward into the bigger rollout. So I think I can see why you thought that was a good idea. So stages of the pilot, let's hear a little bit about actually what were the process steps for you? How were the meetings organized and how did you structure it? So talk us through your summary that we can see on the screen.
Yeah, so effectively it's in two halves, and I think the big dilemma we have in busy schools and colleges is how do you get everybody together at the same time to do anything
Yeah.
really? And that was another benefit of having a small pilot. And along with Erin and the teaching and learning group, I thought long and hard about how we can set this up in a way which isn't too onerous on people, but they still feel like they're involved in something purposeful. So um, having spoken to you as well, I kind of picked out what I thought would be the four most pertinent points, really, and organised a meeting around each one. And the meetings were just half an hour at lunchtime. And the staff who signed up were very professional and very willing to do it. And I thank them for that. And we would meet every 2 weeks in that first half term. And you can see meetings 1 to 4. It just gives you a little outline about what it is we discussed there. Probably the most important meetings were meetings number 2 and 3. Meeting number 1 was really just to introduce what the cycle was and what the thinking was behind it, and to just check if everybody wanted to commit themselves to it, which they did. Meeting 2 and 3, though, definitely more important. And I think what you would know and what you see as you move through it is that the coaching style and emphasis changes as you move between each stage of the model. So I think in meeting 2, I spoke about that, and we discussed as a group actually what a good coaching conversation should look like. And it gave us a chance to remind ourselves about some of the fundamentals behind that, being solution focused if we can, non-judgmental, that idea of listening and asking carefully thought out questions that were quite open-ended. So we went over those principles, which was really good. Once we were comfortable with that, we could then do a little bit more thought on self-reflection, and this was wonderful. And again, as you know, we as teachers, we reflect all the time, actually, at the end of a lesson, during a lesson, and that's really good and really important, and it's something we should keep doing, obviously. But I wanted to try and formalize that a little bit more. So I'd come across the Gibbs model in a course I'd done on coaching previously, and in other areas of education. And I'd seen Cambridge University and Edinburgh University have some brilliant web pages on this stuff. And I wanted to introduce that so that people had the option, if they wanted to do some deeper reflection later, they could. So that meeting was really useful to introduce the Gibbs model, and just set out what benefits that may bring. And then the last meeting there, very straightforward, really. And this was one of the dilemmas. How do you partner people up with each other to do this, and to work with each other in the model? So in that meeting, we decided how we were going to do it, and we put that into place, and went from there. And once we had those 4 meetings out of the way, the following half term was the opportunity to then, plan your lesson, meet your coach, and get the feedback, put things into place, and then wash up at the end and see how you got on with it all. So really fantastic. I think what's slightly different from the cycle, I put in another coaching meeting at the very beginning. So after stage one, when the participant is thinking about what it is they want to look at, I put in a coaching meeting there because I think coaching is really, really effective at trying to get clarity on what it is you want to look at.
Yeah.
And what your goal is. So I think that extra coaching point there was really helpful before you moved on and followed the model directly after that, really. So I think that was a real benefit. So yeah, that was the plan, and that's how it went in the pilot. This year it's been slightly trickier because of we got a new group of people with different commitments. So again, trying to get them all in the same place at the same time is quite hard. So what we've managed to do this year is to have all the meetings and prep we've needed to do with a view to this half term coming to doing the coaching, the teaching, the feedback and evaluation. So we'll get there. It's just happening in a different format. But I think that flexibility suits people at the moment.
Got to work with how people are dealing with things at the time, haven't you? I think.
Yeah, because I'm asking a lot of them and a lot of time from them, and I'm asking them to do something as well as their other job. So I've got to be as flexible as possible, but give them the structures which will give them I suppose, the agency and the security to know they're doing something purposeful.
So many things I like about the way you've planned this. I think this notion of having 4 meetings that are short but are really well focused on the skills that you're going to need to operate effectively within an unseen observation cycle, having those front loaded into your planning so that before they even begin the cycle, they've had that kind of orientation, they've done the thinking, they've started to think about communication skills, the coaching style of it, how we reflect, and the kinds of resources that might be part of the process. It's so useful, I think, to do that up front instead of just throwing people into the cycle and kind of assuming that those skills were in place. What did you notice about the effect of having the meetings before separate from the operational cycle? Could you see the effect of that and the value of that?
Yeah, I think there was a couple of real benefits in that, in the sense that firstly, it gave people the opportunity to ask questions.
Yeah.
At each stage about each aspect, and that's fantastic. That's what I want.
Yeah.
And then, as well as that, it also gave people to get to know the opportunity to get to know each other, because we're on a big site. There's several buildings. We don't often spend a lot of time with each other.
Yeah.
And although we know who we are and we know a bit about each other, we don't work together all the time in such close capacity. So that also broke down some barriers, which was really good. And then everyone felt more comfortable with each other, and we could go from there. So there were some real benefits with doing that. And I must admit, we thought long and hard about how to do it, but it just seemed the logical way to approach things. It also really helped me because as the person sort of trying to coordinate it, it helped me to have this as a kind of very logical set of steps that we could maybe, once we had that in place, we could then use it again. So I think that was really helpful from my perspective too, really. But yeah, real benefits in doing that way. And I suppose I should say at this point is that because of the work we've done over the years and the work I've done in school, that most of our staff have got an awareness of what coaching is.
Yes.
And have some basic skills in coaching, so that made it a lot easier. Those who didn't, however, there was one chap who didn't have anything like that, but he wanted to learn some stuff. I put in place some training to help him get ready, so that by the time we got to the second half term, we were ready to go. So that was helpful to me. Yeah.
I like this notion that we actually need to be primed and prepared and ready to embark on a piece of professional learning that is going to have some depth. And I think the way you structured this has enabled that process to happen more easily. It's almost given a skeleton underneath your structure to support people through the process, hasn't it? Because you've had the skills development, you've talked about how, why to do things in a certain way. So they are really ready to do it fully, usefully, in an informed way. I think that's actually a real strength of this almost 2-part structure here. In meeting,
sorry, Joanne, we also thought long and hard about how we're going to encourage people to record their reflections. And lots of schools, because of the lockdown and COVID, everything had an accelerated approach, I suppose, to using IT to teach and do various things. But because we've got teams in the school, that was perfect actually. It meant we could set up a separate channel. We could set up an online booklet where people could record their own reflections, and they could have their own, that would be private to them. But there was also then a space where we could share our thoughts more publicly about something we may have read or something we'd found out. So although that's something we need to develop in terms of the ongoing communication throughout the process, again, the structure of having the online booklet, a place to keep all the resources and the PowerPoints I was used and so on, that was great. So people had access to all of that. That worked.
An online repository is ideal, isn't it, for that these days? And I mean, having discussion streams, conversations going on through technology, having an area where people can store. Some places I know are using Padlet walls or flip grids, different ways of putting short video reflections, written case studies, examples of resources. I think there's all kinds of ways that people can reflect. At the end of the process, this final bit where we have the final meeting to celebrate and share experience, were there any outputs from that? Did people make a case study? Did people make a recording? Was that an event that was a live event as opposed to something which created a product, if you like?
Yeah, we got together online because at the time we were fairly limited in how often we could meet in person, sort of thing. But we met together, and we didn't record it, unfortunately, but we talked through what our reflections were in terms of what we got out of the process, what insights we'd had, and we talked about how we can potentially move on and share those with other colleagues within the school, which is, if something's working and it's good, that's what we want to do. Absolutely. So that was it was a kind of nice ending to the process, really, because as I say, we got to know each other, we'd worked pretty closely with each other, and this was a good way to say, hey, we've made it, well done. And wow, that's fantastic what you've got out of that. That's really interesting. So yeah, a nice way to wrap it up. But I like that idea of maybe having some sort of recording there. That could be good in the future. Yeah.
It's really nice to think about things that you can then share with the next group, whether that's piloting or a full rollout. I think this notion of kind of reflective outputs is really interesting. So short recordings, digital posters. I'm seeing people making a lot of like summary posters explaining, what they did, why, what their learning from it was, maybe a couple of quotes of feedback from learners as well. And having like gallery walk events now where the posters are up on the walls and people are standing by it to represent their poster, and then colleagues are walking around and asking questions, which is quite a nice showcase event, if you like. So I think there's lovely idea. There's loads of ways of doing it now that kind of incorporate a product that you can take away and use for the future with a live activity that's more reflective and more interactive. So kind of excited to think about that for the next stage of it. Okay, so I'm going to pause us there. That's the end of part one. In part two, we're going to think about coaching and the kind of role of that and how that benefited the process for you.
Okay, thank you.